Welcome to video 1B, where we continue our mystery-solving journey over the South American continent. So what I've done is I've put together a PowerPoint presentation where in a moment I will share with you the calculation, the measurements that enable us to understand what these sites are. And in this video we will cover a few sites. Now, Video 1A, we took a thorough look of this site down here, and we've learned that Jesus is standing there holding the scroll of judgment. That's what we're all suffering from now. This site of Tiwanaku is connected. It's connected to everything. So what we're going to study in this video is the following. The first one is Sacsayhuaman. This site up here, where we have these large stone blocks and the zigzag walls. This is to do with the walls around the gates of heaven. Now, do you see how the stones are cut and shaped perfectly? That's because the people in heaven are a perfect fit. The next site we'll have a look at is the Band of Pits. This is to do with the straightening of the path. That's what Jesus did. He's straightening our path. The next site we're going to have a look at is the Nazca lines. Now the Nazca lines, they represent the characters of Jesus. In other words, the spider represents the temple body, the hummingbird, the divine exaltation and reward, dog, the loyalty, and the monkey, unity. We also have the astronaut. Jesus explained that he is going to the Father. In other words, he's going to the other side. So when we try to follow him and we get into an aeroplane and we look down on the ground, what do we see? Jesus. And if we try to follow him again and then go back down to the ground and then look up, what do we see? Jesus, because he's on the other side. That's why you can see all these things only from the air. Next up we're going to have a look at is the Atacama giant. This is all to do with the ascension and Jesus rising up into heaven. Do you see his body length? It's exactly 33 meters. The age Jesus was when he was crucified or ascended into heaven. You see the 4 and the 8 horizontal lines? 4 verse 8 describes Jesus as the high king. And you see how his arms are folded? His arms are folded up because that's how he's taking off. He's flying through the sky. Then exactly 60 kilometers east of these Valley of the Moon, and there's actually quite a few of them. There's another one directly south. And this is to do with the angels and the protection of God. And then we have the caves. Now the caves in South America are very unique, and they represent you in the darkness, searching for the light. And when you find the light, what do? You find Jesus. The marble caves, which I do have studied, I just haven't included in this video, but they have a similar theme to Neptune, the planet Neptune. So that's quite interesting. And then for this video, to spice things up a little bit, I thought I would add in a plant and a bird. Now these plants are found locally to Tiwanaku. They grow naturally, and they have this trumpet pointing to the ground, and for exactly 3 hours over midnight they release this nice fragrance. So that's quite interesting now. We're going to explain why this plant does that. And there is also a bird. This great Andean Condor is a bird that flies only locally to this area. And it has the biggest wingspan and the highest flying bird in the world. Then we're also going to have a look at the Salt Flats. The Salt Flats is like confirmation of the second covenant. So these waterfalls are quite interesting. Very beautiful waterfall that. They represent the flow of the living water. So what we're going to do now is go into the presentation. Okay, so this is the topics that we're going to discover and learn about. if you take the bearing angle from the site where Jesus is standing, or the video 1A, if you sum up all the bearing angles between all the other sites around the whole continent, you sum up to 3160. And there, God speaks of so loved the world that he gave his only son. The band of pits, the pit bands, one of them is pretty much right bang on 106, Jesus' number. And Jesus straightening our path, that's what it's all about. So I wanted to add in at this point just a refresh or a copy of a slide from video 1A, where we have the calculation of Jesus' number 106, and we also have the calculation of Satan the Beast's number 107, just for your reference. Now, the band of pits, the distance between this band of pits to the Pons Pontiff in Tiwanaku is 845 kilometers. In the 845th verse in the Bible, there it says, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." And if you measure in cubits, Psalm 18:34, there it says, "He makes my path straight." And the polar angle of 103 degrees, Genesis 4:7, and Psalm 103, where he made known his ways to Moses. So this is to do with God instructing Moses, basically leading him down the right path. And the length of the band, 4,500 cubits, it's a reference to 4,500th verse in the Bible, where it says, "Where was no way to turn, either to the right or to the left, in the narrow place." So you see how it's all making references to the path. Now, there are these other sites around South America where the rocks are tapered off. In other words, if you're walking along the path, all of a sudden the rocks kind of squeeze you. So it's to do with the narrowing of the path. Now, to be honest, I don't know where they are. I just added in the photos. So if we continue with the band of pits, you see how the elevation matches up path of sinners and standing in the path of sinners. And this one here, 4727, and when you add 30, you get 4757, and there in Proverbs 4:27, there it is, "Make plain the path of your feet, do not turn to the right or to the left." And again, some more alignments to do, lining up with this one here, 105, "Your word is a lamp at my feet, and you light my path." Just about everywhere where you can find the word path and being on the right path in the Bible, you can match the location, the elevation, or the colatitude, the length. As I've managed to find online this study where they've done a X-ray test on the soil and taken some soil samples, and they can identify that roughly the year 1820 might be the year that these were made, or when they can see that there was a clear change in the soil. In other words, when did God come along and print this? 1820. What I found is interesting, although I studied 1820, not so much 1830, I think the truth is 1830, because 1830 is 60, 60, 60 triangulated. We also can come up with calculations that speak of the place and the high and the way. And I did just want to cover this 60, 60, 60 triangulated, or 63, because this is a number that does come up fairly often with these studies. And you can see that in chapters and verses 6, 6, 6, and 3, 63, yeah, we can see that it's all to do with the kingdom of his righteousness and what Jesus brings. He's the bread of life, and he's the way, he's the path. Now let's have a look. Sacsayhuaman. This site is to do with heaven. And these are the walls. You see how there's 3 layers of these walls? And it's zigzag shaped. In other words, if you try to walk along this wall, what happens? You bump into another wall. And if you walk around it, and you try to find the way in, you can't. There's no way in. You keep bumping into walls. And that's what it's like with heaven. There's no way in. And these stones are cut and shaped perfectly because the people in heaven are a perfect fit. Now, the chord angle to the South Pole, if it's 104 to the North Pole, what's 180 minus 104 is 76. And then Matthew 7:6, Revelation 7:6, it all speaks of what you should do in heaven. Now, do not give what is holy to dogs. See that? That is a very good reference that many people in this world need to learn and understand. And also, Revelation 7:6 speaks of the 144 sealed who will enter heaven. So that's quite key. And there's some other measurements and alignments to this theme. Now, if we have a look at a top view of the site, do you see this circle? There's 3 circles. Do you see how many references this pattern and this shape make to the sanctuary of the righteousness? So the righteous will access God as a fortress and how he defends the path. So all of this points out to being in heaven. And we also have a spoke count. There's 10 inner spokes, 3 outer, and then there's the orientations. If you take a look on Google Earth, you'll see that it's orientated at 14 degrees. So points, time, and divine entry window. So very interesting study. Now this one here, the Nazca lines, if you measure the distance between the Nazca lines and Tiwanaku, where Jesus is standing holding the scroll, you'll find that it is exactly 777 kilometers, the 777. That's interesting because that is 483 miles. Now both numbers come up in the Bible. And the 483, there's an interesting calculation in the book of Daniel. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. So 7 sevens is 49, 62 sevens is 434. If you sum that together, you get 483. So what's it about? The prophecy or time duration, which accounts for 483 years, points to the arrival of the Messiah and Jesus fulfilling the prophecy. So I thought that's quite interesting. And here's some actual measurements which I've taken to understand what the characteristic is. The spider is the temple body. Now 46 meters it took to build the temple. The dog is 20 meters, which is 66 feet. The astronaut that's waving, he is 32 meters tall, by 15 meters wide. That is 70 cubits by 33. So 33 cubits he's the width of Jesus' age at crucifixion. And 70 is righteousness, which Jesus brings to the world. Now if you measure the distance between this guy and the first temple in Jerusalem, in other words, King Solomon's temple, it is 6,200 miles. Let's look at the 62. Chapter 6, verse 2, in the book of Kings, there it speaks of 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 high. And that sums up to 36,000. And 36,000 is the labor of man. And we also see 36. I'll show you at the end where we go to the site where Jesus is standing holding the scroll. The north polar to the chord is 36 degrees. So that number does come up frequently. If you measure this distance between him and the scroll holder, which is close by, up in his southeast, is 483 miles. You measure the surface area. If you calculate that surface area, it's also 480. So what is that? Time duration is the covenant year the temple was built. The 70 cubits tall is the perfect temple body of Jesus. And the 483 is Daniel's prophecy fulfilled. So the earth declares what the Bible does, and that's the true temple not made by hands, is the body of Christ, risen and revealed. Interesting. Now the Atacama giant, if you measure the angle that he's at as if he was facing directly east, is 24 degrees. 24 minus 90 is 66. So where have we seen these numbers before? 66 and 24. I will show you at the end when we go back to have a look at the site where Jesus is standing holding the scroll of judgment that we are all suffering from. So I do not know how this cannot be an important study. But anyway, if we look at these numbers and we put them together, you see how it's referring to the throne of God. So it's all about Jesus returning. Do you see how his arms are folded up? Now, when Superman flies, he puts his arm out straight, whereas it's not really practical. If you think about it, you probably bend your arms at the elbows like this, like he's doing. He's taking off. He's ready for a flight. Now, what's more interesting is that the location of this Atacama giant and the Mount of Olives, Mount Hermon, Jesus' birthplace, and the crucifixion place, I found that the distances all exactly 70% of the Earth's circumference. Do you see that? 70, 70, 70, 70, 70. I mean, the bearing angle is not going to change much because those locations are quite close. And to the Pons Pontiff of 1.3% is also a very interesting number. And if you want to know what happened at the Mount of Olives, that's where Jesus ascended. So the angle to the North Pole, in other words, here's it here. If you measure the angle, if you can imagine a line down to the center of the Earth, and you measure the angle that has to the North and South Pole, you'll get these values. So to the South Pole is 70, or 69, rounded to 70, and the North Pole rounded to 111. And what's further interesting is that when you convert 112 degrees into arc minutes, it's the same as 46, which is the temple body of Jesus, or how long they took to build the temple, multiplied by 144. So it's the temple being redeemed. Now Luke 24:51 sums to 75. And that is the very verse where it says Jesus is carried up into heaven. 75 is half. If you measure the North to South Pole and you sum it up, you get 150. Now that 75 as percentage is exactly half. So I found that very interesting. Here is a little summary of what we've just learned. And the other key alignment here is the 1.3% measurement of the Earth's circumference. And here in Hebrews 1:3, this is where Jesus describes his ascension and enthronement. And in Judges 1:3, it says, "Come up with me." Look, there is his dimensions. He's 33 meters. His body length is 33 and his body width is 10 meters. 33 by 10. Could be referring to the 10 commandments, and he's rotated at 66 degrees, which would refer to the full word of God. And the colatitude angle of 111. Now, we've looked at that before and with this number, and it's a very good number that we learned from the monolith study to describe the Holy Spirit. Now, these are all the chapters and verses in the Bible that speak of Jesus rising up into heaven. And you can match the shape and the number of lines to match all these chapters and verses. For example, the total height is 234 cubits. In the 23,439 verse in the Bible is this one, Mark 16:19, where it says, "He was received up into heaven." John 20:17. Let's just do a count. We count these lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. If you took that 17 and added the 3, what do you get? 20. 2017. Touch me not, I ascend to the Father. The next one we're going to have a look at, which I didn't tell you earlier, is the painted red rock. So this red rock out in the middle of nowhere, you see how it's like dripping. The redness over this rock is literally like it's dripping. And it references the blood of Christ. Now what's interesting is that the complementary angle, the polar angle to the Earth, is 176. And 176 matches in arc minutes 10,560 degrees. And 106 is Jesus' number right there. Now, also, the width is 57 cubits. Where have we seen that number before? 57 is the internal triangular numbers that make up the triangle between the sun gate, the scroll holder, and the high priest. It was actually Abel. Some of these references are referencing Abel. Now, Abel was the first prophet that drew blood. Was not Jesus. So this is the blood covenant between Abel and Jesus. You could say it's a prophetic altar. Next up we have is the waterfalls. Now these waterfalls, this is a double waterfall. The waterfalls reference the flow of the old covenant into the new. Okay, now this is 771 meters tall. If you take 738 and you add 33, which was Jesus' age at crucifixion, you get 771. And Matthew 7:7 is where it says, ask and it will be given. So all the verses 738 speak of, look, rivers of flowing water and the rivers of water of life and wine and water and the spirit. Isn't that interesting? Now, Pumapunku is the site where references Caiaphas condemning Jesus to death. I think he had been eaten by the serpent. In other words, he bowed down to Satan. And the moment you do that, he casts the serpent over you. So you've got no control over yourself anymore. And what's funny is that it's exactly 966 miles. 9-6 speaks of Jesus' spit. Spit. So even though it's fluid, it's kind of a bad thing, spit. And that is the distance to Pumapunku, where the temple is blown down. That's why all the stones are knocked over, because there's not one stone of this place left upon another. Those were Jesus' very words. So to the North Pole, we got 10,662. That's interesting, because 106, Jesus' number, and the 62. So you could say Jesus and judgment. And there it is, 106.7, the rebel by the sea. So 107 is the number of the beast. There's many other calculations, I'm just showing that now. But anyway, the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. So again, even the bearing angle. So it's all to do with fluids in the Bible, this waterfall. I thought that's quite fantastic. So we also have another interesting waterfall I found, is this one, Angel Falls. Look at this magnificent waterfall. It has a height, it has a location. And when we start adding up the distances to the first temple in Jerusalem and the Pons Pontiff, where Jesus is standing there holding the scroll, do you see how it all adds up to another little theme? Heaven sends living water, the voice speaks from above, atonement is made, the stranger is received, the offering is accepted, the altar is extinguished, the silver trumpets sound, the covenant is rewritten in stone. So that's quite interesting. Some more calculations for that one. Now the caves. The caves represent being in the darkness. Now what's interesting I've found is that if you measure, the first cave we're going to have a look at is this Grotto dos Brijos. And the distance between the scroll holder, Tiwanaku, and this cave is exactly that distance. And when you convert into, it's just under 46%, it is 46% of the Earth's radius. That is 46% of the Earth's radius. Now, again, that's interesting because it took 46 years to build the temple. Now, this cave has an entranceway, a carved high. You can't see it here, unfortunately. Don't have the right photo. But it has an entranceway carved to 106 meters. And it has this great big wedding cake. They call it a wedding cake. And I've calculated the volume. And it all matches and lines up with some interesting matches to Jesus and what he brings into the world. Now that distance of that height of 106 is very interesting. One of these caves' length has a cave length which lines up with the book of Daniel. But I couldn't put everything into one study, so apologies for that. But I'll get there. I just wanted to share with you this cave because it's so strongly. Look at the polar angle of 77. Jesus was the 77th prophet. So we get 77 twice. We got a cave length and the polar angle. Now there's another cave that's full of crystals, giant crystals, that's closed. This cave has no entrance, no exit. It's closed, it's sealed. It has a bearing of 320 degrees, okay, from the scroll holder. And what I also found is that the distance, if you measure the distance, it measures exactly 66.6. In other words, wisdom and understanding. That's what 666 represents. And we may refer to the bearing angle as Exodus 3, where it speaks of flames of fire within a bush. So it's got a high temperature, this cave. People can't even go down it deep enough because of the high temperature. That temperature is 58 degrees. The crystal weight is 55 tons and the length is 11 meters. So when you put all this together and find a common theme, it's to do with the crystals being frozen light. Look at the hardness. The Mohs hardness of the crystals is 2, and that's quite interesting because 2 represents the duality which Jesus is. So this cave represents something burning hot, the fire, because Jesus right now, he's watching everything that's going on and he's pissed. And so is God. God and Jesus right now are not happy with everything that's going on in the world. They're fully up to date, believe me. They watch the news every day. And they're pissed. Okay, and this is the high temperature of Jesus wanting to come out and mess somebody up. Preferably Satan. So this cave also has a length of 300 meters. 300 meters is 18,000 arc minutes. And the 18,000th verse in the Bible is this, Ezekiel 48:35. And the Lord is there. There it says right there, the Lord is there. You see that? It's quite interesting. Now the lakes and lagoons represent the baptism. And one of them down here is Jesus' baptism specifically. If you consider the longitude and latitude coordinates, 316, there it says that is the very verse in Matthew where Jesus is baptized. And if you measure the surface area of this lake, you get 10,100 square kilometers. In Corinthians 10 verse 1, they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea. Okay, so again, it's talking about baptism. And if you measure the same surface area in cubits, Luke 3:6 is in 36 billion cubits, this is the verse where John the Baptist is speaking in the River Jordan, baptizing people. And there he says, all flesh shall see the salvation of God. So again, you see, it's just constant references with where this lake is. Its surface area, its width, its length, its distance to the North Pole, distance to the South Pole, distance to the site of Tiwanaku. And here are some more lagoons around. This one's in Argentina. Do you see how its elevation is 66 meters above sea level? And it has a 24-kilometer width. So again, we're seeing these numbers, 24 and 66. Here is another one, the coming as Messiah, and this is the great flood, which is baptism through divine cleansings. What we should be doing is baptizing ourselves, because we don't want that evil serpent going over us. We can't see it, it's invisible, but if you bow down to Satan or worship any of his lying false prophets, then that's what can happen to you. And you want to protect yourself. You want to keep away from that. So learning about baptism is actually quite important. Scientists just have not yet nailed down the science that Satan has, because these things are too advanced for us just yet. It doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist. Of course it exists. It's there. And God's told us about it. But you got to listen with your ears. Many people don't want to do that. So one more lagoon, and there it has further references like this one. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. Now, Jesus is not the one you want to be baptized with. Because if you need to be baptized by Jesus, then you're screwed, because he does it with fire, not water. Our Lake Titicaca. This is a very interesting lake, and I actually wanted to leave this one for last because it speaks of high place of water and Jesus being rejected near water, and he returns later to save. So, very interesting study, this Lake Titicaca. Underneath Lake Titicaca, they've very recently discovered this underwater feature. And these images here are true and correct, but not this one. And I have managed to obtain the size and the stone. There's 80 steps. The diagonal is 206. And the kilometers from Tiwanaku, look at that, 126. The number of God. So this is a very interesting part of the study, and when you put it together, you may say that it's submerged with a sign of something preserved from judgment. So it's a little bit like the theme from the Crystal Caves, where there's something heating up under the ground and it's going to come out. And very much like under Titicaca, where this feature is also saying something similar. It's testifying to the promise of emergence. So, again, it's making reference to Jesus and what he's going to bring and has brought to the world. Now, exactly 60 kilometers east, we have these strange valleys, and many people say that these are strange because it's nothing else like it in the whole continent. So we can calculate a surface area of the whole thing, and we have an elevation above sea level, 3,250 meters above sea level. We have a distance, a bearing angle, and we put it together, it starts to make reference to the angelic protection of the angels and the protection God gives you. So also, again, this is a different one now, Valle de las Animas. Some beautiful valleys here, and that's what they represent. And this one is down south, the Atacama. He's close to the Atacama giant. Now down here we have the Salt Flats. Now the Salt Flats has a surface area of 10 billion, and if you rounded it, you could round to 106 or 10.6 billion square meters. 106 is Jesus' number. So this is an interesting study, and as it turns out, we find that it's solidifying the fact that Jesus is the fulfilling of the second covenant. So the flatness is stability, the salt is preservation, the closed basin separation, the large size global witness, and the brightness. The brightness of the salt is the light of the world. So here are some distances. That distance there, 417 kilometers to the Pons Pontiff. 417. Again, interesting number. Now finally we have a plant that grows very close by Tiwanaku, and it's these angel trumpets. Now this plant grows very close by, And the length of the flower is exactly 1 cubit, 45.27.72. Very interesting. And look at the height, the plant height. You get 24 hands. That's 24 hands high. 5 petals as in the grace of God. Look at the chromosome count, the genetic information of this plant, 72 chromosomes. And the molar mass, this box here is the fragrance or the scent. And the molar mass is 154 for this linalool. So these different chemicals, look at these numbers. These numbers all actually line up with passages in the Bible speaking of fear the Lord and mercy forever and praise the Lord of all nations, and Adam begets sons of his daughters, and thou hast brought up my soul from the grave. So this, look at the angle, 77 from one of these. One of these grows 77 bearing degree from Tiwanaku. So very interesting numbers. And when you put it all together, it is a voice being trumpeted or blown into the ground saying, wake up, the time is now. So this is like a prophetic warning of the coming of Jesus. Because when he comes, he's going to mess up all the evil people in the world. Now, one of these angel trumpets is called the Pink Panther angel trumpet. And I didn't find any difference between any of them. I just think it's very beautiful and added it in here. Now finally we have the Andean Condor. Now this incredible large bird, it flies so high that sometimes they bump into satellites. No, it's not actually true. 18,000 feet is the height that these birds fly up to. They have the biggest wingspan of any bird in the world. But 18,000 feet is more than halfway up to the average jumbo jet. And if you take a look at the wingspan is 7.2 cubits, as in 72. And the glide distance, 99. So you see, like the 99 sheep that Jesus left to go looking for that one lost one, and the 72 that Jesus sent out in the name of peace. Look at the chromosome count, 80. 8, the divine, which Jesus is part of. Look at the genome size, 1.19. You could round that to 1.2, as in 12. Breeding cycle, maximum 24 months. There's a 24 again. Lifespan, they live up to 70 years. 70, the number of righteousness. 6,000 is the total time for man. From Adam and Eve to the return of Christ is 6,000 years. So it's the Alpha and the Omega, which Jesus is. Jesus was the first and the last. It's beginning and the end. So, isn't that interesting? So this is an amazing bird. Now, I found that there's 3 ways you can take this bird's numbers and calculate 77, which Jesus was the 77th prophet in the Bible. So that's very interesting. Now, I found there's 4 ways you can calculate 106, Jesus' number. So, what does this bird do? Well, also, do you see how it's got a roughed up, bloodied head? It's got a rough head. And sometimes it actually looks like it's bleeding. And that is because when Jesus was crucified, his head was bloodied, battered, and bleeding. Now, if you look at the summary here, it's basically identifying Jesus as the one who reigns, who suffered, and who fulfills the law. And he is above, this is the highest flying bird that we have in existence today. Now, another thing I found is that 7 times 7 times 7, in other words, 777, is 343. And you can get 343 by summing up all the variables and the aspects of this bird. All these aspects and how it all sums to 343. So I thought that's very interesting. It also has only one egg, one cross, one crust. Isn't that incredible? So if we have a look at Google Earth and we come over here and we just say, okay, so what I want to do is take off this. Now, do you see the horizontal? Do you see the equator? What we want to do is lower it so it's sitting directly above us. So we're looking straight down on the equator. Now, do you see the site of Tiwanaku? It's just south of that Lake Titicaca. So what we're going to do is rotate the Earth so that that is sitting on the edge of the Earth's circumference there, or the tangential position. So we're going to rotate, rotate, rotate. So it's roughly there. Okay. So we're looking straight down on the Earth. Now, I need to demonstrate that angle, so I need to call up a diagram. So this is the diagram now. And in the next slide, now you can see what we're looking at here. That angle of 106, that is the polar colatitude angle. If you measure it accurately, right where the scroll hold, you see he's holding the scroll here with 7 seals. He's Jesus, the scroll holder, and it's exactly where he's standing is 10655. Revelation 5:5. This is where it says Jesus takes the scroll and it's 7 seals. Now, if you add that angle with the North Pole with the caudal angle, 36, down here, you get 143.27. 143 is the Hebrew number for the phrase, I love you. And 27 is the chapter Jesus was crucified. So that makes you think. And if you look at the South Pole, if you look at this angle and that angle, and you sum them together, you get God's number, 126, and the 72, the number Jesus sent out in the name of peace. So what is all this saying? God's sending out his message of peace. Now this very spot where he's standing just happens to be 3,860 meters above sea level. 386 is the Hebrew number for Jesus, which means salvation. Jesus was named after the Hebrew word for salvation. And if you take his longitude and latitude coordinates, you could sum them up to 66. And the angle that he's standing at behind in front of the sun gate and the high priest down there, that is 57, 57, and in front 66. 57 being the frailties of man. So in that side, he's being elevated into the holy of holy places. So what I can do is, let's come out of that. Let's go to the site. So in video 1A, we had a thorough investigation of this site and down here. But this is the site where the stones are blown down. This is where Jesus was unfairly condemned by the evil Caiaphas, who I think had bowed down to Satan or some false prophet, and he cast the serpent over him. So I think Caiaphas belonged to Satan, is probably going to go to hell, and he was standing right there. Now if you measure that distance between the center part and this here, you get the beast's number, 107, like I showed you in the calculations earlier. This platform here is the Holy of Holies. Do you see how he's sandwiched? There's Jesus right there. He's sandwiched between 2 rows of lampstands, 7 and 7 lampstands. Put you right in there. There it is. There are the 7 lampstands, and there he stands, the Son of God, holding man in his right hand, and in his left hand he's holding the scroll of judgment. Now I believe this site was printed by God in the year 600, because that's when Jesus was cut off and it no longer has his protection. So then he stepped up. He's stepping into the Holy of Holies. He's the only person who can come into this place. So it's pretty cool that we've got a place that we can step into. And if you measure the distance between this corner, there you got 66 meters by 24 degrees. So that number does come up quite a lot when studying these sites, because it refers to what Jesus did. And on that note, we're going to end video 1B. Look forward to 1C. Bye bye.